This podcast is supported by MIDI Health. Are you in midlife, feeling dismissed, unheard, or just plain tired of the old healthcare system? You're not alone. In fact, even today, 75% of women seeking care for menopause and perimenopause issues are left entirely untreated. But it's time for a change. It's time for MIDI. MIDI's not just a healthcare provider. It's a women's telehealth clinic founded and supported by world-class leaders in women's health. Their clinicians provide one-on-one, face-to-face consultations where they truly listen to your unique needs. They offer a full range of holistic, data-driven solutions that isn't one-size-fits-all care. This is care uniquely tailored for you. At MIDI, you will find that their mission is clear: to help all women thrive in midlife, giving them access to the healthcare they deserve. Because they believe midlife isn't the middle at all. It is the beginning of your second act. Ready to feel your best and write your second act script? Visit joinmidi.com today to book your personalized, insurance-covered virtual visit. That's joinmidi.com. MIDI, the care women deserve.
A lot of people think creatine is just really focused on that athlete and for muscle building purposes or weight gain purposes. But some of the most exciting research has been around prevention of muscle loss, treating athletes with concussion, or really helping with brain health. But really what's cool is maybe it can slow the aging process.
Yay Networks.
A quick note before we dive into today's podcast. If you like what you hear, I would love for you to subscribe to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, wherever you download your podcast. It would also be incredible if you take a minute to rate and review this podcast. Those things do matter, and they really help us. Creatine is one of those products, those supplements that for years we've thought of as, for strength performance, for weight gain, for bodybuilders. We look at creatine, we think about creatine and muscle mass sort of hand in hand. In this week's episode of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, we're going to be talking about creatine in a way that maybe you haven't thought of it, seeing it through this lens that there's potential application that can benefit so many more of us in so many other ways than we've really been aware of. We'll be talking about what the benefits are of creatine, safety. I know that that's something that kind of swirls around. If someone's familiar with creatine as a supplement, there's always, a lot of questions we get about safety, cramping, hydration status and all. So we're going to be addressing that. Then how to do it. What's the dosage? What's the recommended dosage? What's the easy ways to incorporate this? And really, who can benefit from this? So I had so much information that I've been kind of reviewing, organizing, collecting to share with y'all. But it's always more fun when we do this in a conversation instead of just me having a one-way conversation with y'all. So today I am joined by one of my good friends and colleagues, Tavis Piattoly. T, I'm so excited. We're actually doing a podcast together.
I'm excited too. Thank you for inviting me here. And this is going to be so much fun, Molly. It's great to see you and talk to you.
Is this our first one, or have we ever done a podcast together before? I don't think so.
I'm pretty sure this is our first podcast, as long as we worked together.
I know.
We talked a lot, but we never actually did a podcast.
And so thank you for doing this with me. Also, I was thinking about it. I'm like, who better to talk through about this than you? You and I have worked together, been friends for literally decades. Tell our listeners first kind of your background, your areas of expertise.
Yeah. So like you, I'm a dietitian and, worked in a lot of spaces in the sports world, but I started my career working with you at Elmwood Fitness Center and now Hudson Fitness Center. And briefly before that worked in pediatrics. And then you and I had a conversation one day and you're like, I need another dietitian. And I'm like, I need to get out of this place I'm in, even if it means commuting from Baton Rouge to New Orleans every day, which I did. But so I spent 14 years with Elmwood Fitness Center and working in different roles, which was probably one of just my most enjoyable times of my life because I still have lifelong friends such as you and others that I communicate with and just working in the world of fitness. So that was always a lot of fun.
I didn't realize it was 14 years. Wow.
Yeah, 2001, maybe 13, 2001
wow.
and 2004.
That's awesome. Okay.
So yeah, it was good. But I was fortunate during that time to really get my feet wet in the world of sports nutrition. We worked with Mackey and at that time moved over to Tulane and did some work in consulting with them as their sports dietitian. And really was a consultant for them for quite a long time until about 2014 as well. And then spent some time with the New Orleans Saints in 06 to 13 as their consultant. the Pelicans and Hornets. Did a little bit of work with LSU, a small fraction, just coming up and speaking. But today I've transitioned into really some pretty cool places. A lot of my education, or at least a lot of my focus, has been just the love of supplements and trying to help young athletes, older athletes understand, number one, the efficacy and research behind that, but also the safety behind that. So, today I started a company years ago with a friend of mine. He's an athletic trainer. It was kind of funny. He called me one day when I was at Elmwood, and I was actually, upstairs in my office, and I got this random phone call, and he's at a high school, and we just had a conversation. And today we have a business called My Sports Dietitian, and we created an app called Eat to Win. And a lot of the work we do is to service education platforms and different means to educate the youth athlete, the parent, the coach, to change the way they eat and understand how does this affect their performance and health. Also, right now, my full-time job is with a company called Omega Quant Analytics. We test the body for omega-3. We test your blood for omega-3. Our founder invented the test back in 2009. So that's a lot of fun. There's a lot of benefits to know what that number is, and that's a whole different conversation. And then I do a few other things. I teach grad school for Concordia. I do some consulting for a company called Macros Inc. I have another side business I'm trying to get off the ground with a sports drink called Liquid Fuel. So the way my brain works, I can never just do one thing. It's got to be multiple things all the time, because if not, I'd be bored. I think the most fun is I have an 11-year-old daughter that's just so much fun to watch grow up, and we put music and all that stuff.
Yeah. No, I think as y'all hear, I mean, Tavis's experience and the areas of work that he's in, that's why I was like, who better to talk through creatine than this? Also, I think any of us who think, oh, we've got a lot on our plates, Tavis always has 16 different things that are all happening at once. But they're all things that you're passionate about. They're things that you have longevity with. It's not a lot of stops and starts. It's something that you start, you put that passion into it, it grows, and then there's more and others and more and others, and it just kind of like spreads and expands. It's all ways that you're getting that wellness education, information out there, but in all these different platforms, all these different mediums. I love that.
Yeah, but I have to say, if it was just me trying to do this alone, I would have failed a lot more. Things would have not existed, because without the people that I've kind of worked with, without them, these would not happen. So it's always been a team, and I've been very fortunate to be surrounded by great people like yourself, and just to help do things like that you love to do. When you're finished doing them, you're like, okay, we did pretty good at helping others. And I think that at the end of the day, that's the end result.
No, you're right. You're totally right. And it's, so I couldn't remember the exact years. And so starting with us at 2001. So it's just crazy when you think it's like decades plural that we've known each other, worked together. So also it's just a beautiful thing when you have someone who is your friend and such a high level of trust. And then it's just like, just like this, I'm always like, hey, T, you want to do this podcast with me on creatine? And you're like, yes, I'm in. Of course he's going to say yes.
Just real quick, a funny story. I go back, because I didn't know you in college, but we had like a class or two together. You were a couple years older, and I did this project, and I don't remember the teacher's name, but I read the book Sugar Busters, and I'm like, I'm going to do my project on Sugar Busters. And in the dietetics profession still today is pretty much 95% female. So I'm in the class, and it's all girls, and I'm presenting. There you are, and I think you're the only person that's like, hey, this makes sense. This guy's presenting on something, and I just can remember seeing your face like laughing, like all the other people trying to make fun of me, like, oh, sugar's not bad, blah blah blah. So it was just
right, because
really
it was like back in the 90s, fat was like everything, right?
Yeah, like don't eat fat-free cookies, but they have like 100 grams of sugar in each one. So I still love that story, because I'm like, I remember Molly from college, because we were in class together.
Right, and I was like one of the ones that was receptive to it, and not like, what's this guy talking about, this like pseudoscience over there. Right. No, I love that.
A lot of those. Yeah.
So creatine, there's, this it's been around also about as long as we're talking about, since about the 90s, it really kind of hit the market. I feel like for at least the first decade, if not longer, almost all of the focus, and correct me if I'm wrong, but was on like, strength training, strength athletes, things that we're looking at, athletes that were focused more on size or gains or intense workouts that needed that recovery. So we would think like a football player, a weightlifter, like I think in my mind, at least, that was sort of like, that was going to be who I would recommend creatine to.
Yeah. That back in the day, like you said, what's crazy about creatine, it was first discovered in the 1800s and first administered in 1900. but it really just didn't get a lot of, it wasn't popular in the 60s or 70s, 80s, but then 90s. And when a company around, called EAS, and this guy, Bill Phillips, came around, he created a product called phosphocreatine, or, phosphagen HP, which is creatine. And then it just became a product that was just thought to be beneficial for athletes and get bigger, stronger, faster. Take creatine, right? I took it in high school thinking, I'm going to be massive and miraculous and kill people in football.
Mm-hmm.
But nope, that didn't happen. But we didn't understand the science. There was really not much science at that time.
And so we'll get into the science, we'll get into the dosage, we'll get into what creatine is. But before, just to kind of put a few of these things out there, for our listeners, if you're thinking like, is this something that I would really want to like tune in for the rest of this? We think about creatine in terms of becoming stronger, helping with that muscle recovery. And so, yes, there's that. There's also injury prevention. There's also even things like brain and spinal cord protection. But when we also look at creatine benefit as something that can be beneficial in the aging process. So as people are older adults, that there can be a really significant benefit from supplementing with creatine to prevent essentially what's age-related muscle loss. I have this 82-year-old, he lives in Lafayette, and he's been taking creatine, and he'll have questions every once in a while. And he's sort of like, is it a cure-all? No, but it is sort of one of those every little bit helps that, if you are finding that as you get older, you're experiencing that muscle loss or muscle weakness, or there's a lot there that we're going to be talking about that creatine can be protective. Anything that I didn't hit on that you just want to add in really quickly before we kind of back up on big picture?
Yeah, there's so many clinical applications to creatine that have nothing to do with athletic performance. We can probably spend a whole podcast just talking about that. So I know for time purposes, TBI, concussion, from neuroregeneration process, we're using creatine from a treatment process from a concussion management. As you mentioned, age decline and just what's called muscle loss or sarcopenia. That's a very common reason to use creatine. But to me, it's one of the most versatile nutrients that is not, it's underutilized.
Right.
I personally think every single person, especially those above 18, should be using it either small doses or moderate doses, depending on how much training they do, because there's so much benefit that we'll get into.
But first, safety, because there is, also like we're saying back in the 90s, when you thought about it more in terms of, strength-based athletes or like a football player type athlete only, one of the things that was sort of talked about, I guess, two big things. One, it was thought that it increased risk of cramping, muscle cramping, and two, that it could be hard on our kidneys. So talk to us about those two things.
Yeah, but both of those are completely false. And there's been a lot of long-term studies that have looked at that. First, if we look at the effects of kidney and liver function, since creatine breaks down a small percentage of creatine that's left over, because 95% of this is found in your skeletal muscle, in your muscle tissue, another 5% in your brain, and a small percentage, in other areas of organs in the body. But 1 to 2% does break down into creatinine. And if you've ever had your creatinine level tested, that's a marker of kidney function. So there's always been a lot of concern in the physician world and sports med world that don't take creatine, it hurts your kidneys. That's false. Dr. Rick Kreider did a 5-year study, and then he followed it up with another 21-month study that looked at long-term administration or consumption of creatine, and it looked at liver function, kidney function, a lot of other markers, lipids. And there was no elevation or no impact at all that would be of concern. And they gave them a loading dose. And I know we'll kind of get into what that means, but that's just basically 20 grams a day spread out over 4 times, 5 grams per dose. And then that was for 1 week or 5 days. And then they gave them a maintenance dose of 5 grams for the next 5 years, every single day. And there was no elevation at all in liver function or kidney function. So they just basically, after multiple studies have looked at this, even in shorter term, showed no side effects. They debunked the fact that this can cause those problems. Now, that doesn't mean we haven't seen case studies along those lines. People that are taking probably way much more than they're recommended. That's what a lot of the problems around safety is today, is some of these young athletes think, oh, it says 1 scoop. What happens if I take 5 or 6 scoops? Will I get to that end result faster? And the answer is no, but that could cause something to happen. We just don't know. Everybody's different. From the cramping side, there's been multiple studies that show, if anything, it actually improves or reduces the ability for the muscle to cramp, or maybe just inhibits cramping. And that's mainly because when you consume creatine, it's going to actually help water retention, increase fluid in the cells, which that's what you want, right? In order to prevent cramping. Now, cramping is a much more complicated issue than just electrolytes. There's a lot more going on, muscle excitability and overuse. So right now, from everything I've talked to on the athletic training side and sports med side, that those that have studied cramping, the first sign of cramping is usually not related to nutrition. But there's been a lot of assumption that, it must be creatine. That's
Right.
not the case. There's so many other things to look into.
So when we talk about the issues with our kidneys or muscle cramping, which are two things that come to mind first, those are like the first questions I get, not the case. And I'll also say we'll link to, in the show notes of the episode, a couple of different journal articles, some position papers that will have everything that Tavis and I are talking about in way more detail links. So you can also just kind of read more on this. But those, kind of wanted to knock those two things off right off the bat. I also have, actually, somebody just was asking me this week, does creatine have a steroid effect? Does it affect someone in the same way? Because again, you think weight gain with creatine is a reason that some people would take it, muscle gains or strength gains, we should say, but it is absolutely not at all structurally similar to a steroid, an anabolic steroid.
Yeah, and anabolics, absolutely not. No, completely different. So creatine is made up of 3 amino acids, methionine, glycine, and arginine. When we talk anabolic steroids and anything else, there's nothing remotely close that will do what anabolic steroids does to the body, which is obviously extremely harmful in a lot of different ways. And that's, again, we can go into that in a long detail. If anything, creatine is not just acutely or even chronically going to help you gain weight if you're not in calorie surplus. I've seen athletes lose weight taking creatine because they were burning 4,000 or 5,000 calories and only consuming 2,000. So just taking creatine by itself is not an effective way to gain weight or build muscle. It has to be combined with other stimulus. And that's number one. If you're trying to build muscle, you can't do that without lifting weights. You just don't take creatine and eat a lot of protein and your muscle grows. Right? You have to have a stimulus, and that's 3 to 5 days of a progressive overload of a strength training program. You combine that now, number two, you have to have adequate calories, and then also you have to have adequate protein. When you have those three, those things can help you increase your body weight and build muscle without creatine. But just creatine, what it might do is add in a little bit of an additional effect. And we've seen numerous studies that shows when all those things are controlled and you have the right dose of creatine, then yes, it adds an additional effect. But it's not a magic pill. It's not going to happen in a week. It's not going to happen in 2 weeks. Probably over the course of 6 to 8 to 12 weeks, really around 12 weeks of consistent patterns is when you're going to probably notice the effect of maybe that supplement. But again, those other 3 things have to happen. Rest, all those things are really, really important. Anabolic steroids, creatine doesn't alter testosterone levels. And if it does, it's not going to be at a very, it's going to be very minute. It's not going to alter growth hormone. It's not going to alter a lot of the hormonal patterns that when you inject your body or exogenously take testosterone, then your anabolic hormones are going to spike extremely quick. And that's going to also elevate resting metabolic rate. You're going to be hungry. You're going to be eating a lot more. And then you combine that with the training program. We've seen in those studies, within 8 weeks, 16, 18 pounds of lean muscle, which is just absolutely ridiculous, right? But that comes with a long list of side effects.
Right. Let's take a minute to talk about Smile Brilliant, sponsor for this week's episode. So one of the things that we know about stress is that it manifests itself in just so many ways. And one way that many people experience stress is grinding their teeth, clenching their jaw. And we know that not only does this damage our tooth enamel, it can crack our teeth, lead to migraines, and fixing or preventing these issues, it can be really expensive. So the cost of custom night guards from Smile Brilliant is low. It's as low as $45 per guard. Reorders are $25 per guard. A digital file of your dental impression is kept on file to make reorders hassle-free. So visit smilebrilliant.com. Use promo code FUELED for 20% off. Check out their night guards. You can also check out the other products at Smile Brilliant, from custom-fitted teeth whitening trays, whitening gels, and more. That's smilebrilliant.com with 20% off using promo code FUELED. Talk to us about how it works, like how it has the effect that it does, creatine, kind of the mechanism of action. Like what is happening? What is it doing inside of our bodies that are giving us that benefit?
Yeah. So think about when you work out, you break down your muscle tissue. That's called protein breakdown. And when you consume protein or calories after, especially protein, it's called protein synthesis, the rebuilding of muscle. So if you do a high repeated bout of activity, whether that's lifting weights and let's say you do a bench press and you do 3 sets of 10, and it's pretty heavy and it's exhausting, and you're breaking down all your tissue, no different than if you ran sprints on track and field or swam laps at a very high intense pace or ran on a treadmill. Your muscle creatine levels are being depleted. So when you consume creatine, all you're doing is replacing those levels. That's why creatine is very effective for high intense training. Someone who's trying to lift weights, play football, just running sprints, whether you're swimming in a pool, doing anything intense. It could be even something like tennis. We don't think of tennis as a muscle building sport, but it's a sport where you're running, laterally back and forth, front and back. There's a lot of short bouts of intense sprint performance. That's going to be exhausting your muscle creatine stores. So when you're doing that for 60, 90 minutes, 120 minutes, you watch some of these tennis matches, 3 hours, or any type of soccer match, your muscle creatine levels are pretty depleted. So after that is when we restore creatine by consuming creatine, whether it's in a small dose, whether that's in a loading phase, which we'll get into. And then when you combine that with things like carbohydrate, it actually just gets to your muscle tissue faster and helps the recovery process. So that's where really creatine is beneficial, is helping the body repair itself and replace what it's losing in the body. So because we naturally store creatine. Everybody has creatine stored. We actually consume creatine every day in food, like when you eat chicken, fish, pork, steak, any of that. That's got very small amounts of creatine in it.
So the recovery post-workout, and then also energy production at that cellular level, that energy production is essentially kind of the essence of it.
Yeah. So, the whole chemical process, obviously at the end of the day, it's going to produce ATP, right? That power, when we look at, I was awful in biochemistry in school, so I can't give you all the pathways and all the different things of like this, and this. But at the end of the day, it produces ATP.
Yes.
ATP produces energy and strength. So when we're increasing ATP production in our cells, we're going to see a positive outcome with all those other things that are met.
Energy with the ability to perform at that higher level, and performing at that higher level is going to allow us to become more conditioned to either lift more or increase our ability to have that endurance or that speed, that power, that output, so it allows us to do more. It also helps with that recovery after. And you heard some of the things Tavis was saying, yes, bench pressing, but then also, like I've shared before with y'all, that I've been learning tennis. And so I'll go out there and I might, for an hour and a half, it's drilling and it's just constant hitting. And like he said, running back and forth. And that's something that before I wouldn't have really thought of that as being something that could benefit from creatine. He also mentioned soccer. And so things that we look at, that extended energy output, and those are areas where maybe creatine could be a benefit. And then, like we said, people who are aging, and there's this natural loss of muscle mass as we get older. And so all of these are kind of areas that can have some level of benefit. Tavis, when you were talking earlier, you talked about, I think this is also a really big takeaway. It's not a one and done. So many times someone does something for a few days. Oh, it's not working. And then they give it up. And that's just added to like one more thing that's sitting on the shelf unused that like they tried and moved on. But you mentioned 12 weeks. So you've got to be consistent. It needs to be daily on the regular. What are some of the things that someone might notice at that 12-week window, 3 months or so in, that would allow them to see, okay, is this giving me the benefit that I thought it might?
Yeah, I think the first thing is strength. If they're consistent with their workouts, if they're consistent with taking creatine every single day, especially after their workouts, that's probably the first thing they're going to see. It really just depends. Body composition could change. You're building lean muscle, but there's a lot more that goes into the body composition component than just creatine alone. Obviously, diet, timing of diet, macronutrients health can really depend on what that looks like. I think the first thing, though, is from a strength component, that's probably the first thing we're going to see on a regular basis.
I would imagine also maybe a sensation of, I don't know if I would call it as less fatigue, but I think maybe feeling like you have that higher stamina, that higher endurance.
Yeah, one of the outcomes is greater work tolerance.
Yeah.
So that is one of the benefits we've seen is a greater working capacity. You're able to get through those workouts, obviously with less fatigue, as you mentioned. So that's a great point you mentioned.
I was reading that when we look at like how much, our normal levels of creatine, if you're looking at, and we won't even say like kind of like what it's millimoles per kilogram, which doesn't matter for our listeners so much, but our normal levels for just the average person is about 120. Supplementing with creatine can bring us to that, 140, 160 level. And so when we think about, basically, you said, we're already getting creatine from our diet. Our bodies make small amounts of creatine. Our normal saturation levels are at 120 on this ranking that we're talking about. When we supplement with creatine, that can bring us to that maybe 160. So we're talking about a 1/3 increase. Our bodies make it. We get it from food anyway, but supplementing with it can just give us that extra boost, and almost thinking of it as basically just saturating those creatine stores or topping off those creatine stores. So that's sort of what we're talking about. Again, completely not in the steroid category, not something that we need to, for most of us, think about. Of course, if someone has other underlying conditions, this is not, in that conversation. But for the most part, when we look at kidney safety, if we look at muscle cramping, those are things that we can sort of take that off the table as far as something to be concerned about and not being fearful of adding these things in. And so when we're talking about dosage, Tavis has mentioned loading a couple of times. There's two schools of thought. So one is do creatine loading for 5 to 7 days. And that is, as Tavis said, it's 20 grams of creatine, typically looking at 5 grams 4 times a day and doing that for about 5 to 7 days, and then settling into about 3 to 5 grams of creatine a day. Or you can do not bypass that loading phase and just go straight into 3 to 5 grams a day. The main thing that I see, Tavis, as far as the difference with that is almost like how quickly someone might start to see those benefits.
Yeah, it's when you load, you probably are going to see, and again, it's all individual. I've had some clients over the years that, hey, I don't really notice any changes, right, in how I feel or how I look. And again, you got to give it time, at least a minimum, especially if you do the loading phase, which I personally don't recommend anymore. Years ago, when that was really popular, that was definitely something to do, but we don't have to do that because that allows you to take it a little bit longer when you don't. But again, you could possibly see some benefits if you do load within 4 weeks. We've seen some research that's shown that 8 weeks is probably a better marker to look for. I personally say with any type of changes that you make with whether it's diet or supplementation, and depending on the type, give it at least 8 to 12 weeks before you really can truly evaluate if that's working for you or not.
So your approach, you typically, unless there was a reason someone you think maybe should for a time factor or whatever, typically you'll bypass that loading phase and just go straight to the 3 to 5 grams daily?
Correct. Yeah. Even for athletes, we probably go a little higher, 5 grams, 3 grams for those that are maybe on the female non-athlete side that's just looking for maintenance.
Right.
But it also depends on body weight. You might have someone that might just weigh more, and the person might be more than someone that weighs less, regardless of gender.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point.
Between 0.3 grams per kg, but I like to say 3, like you mentioned, 3 to 5 grams. For athletes, it's always post-workout. Mm-hmm. Use it after you've broken down your creatine stores. Don't take it before. Don't use it in a pre-workout with caffeine, because caffeine can actually blunt or inhibit creatine uptake. So I always recommend after a workout.
Is there a reason that would someone want to divide it and do part before, part after? Or is there any benefit if someone is like you said, in a 2-hour tournament or match that's going to be a high energy output? Is there any benefit to doing it midway through?
No, because you're not going to see an acute impact of creatine. Creatine is going to be more long-term. Okay. So it's not like carbohydrate that you can take carbohydrate before a long race or during or after. It's going to immediately increase blood sugar and improve glycogen storage, right? Whereas creatine is not that acute benefit. It's not just going to all of a sudden, boom, saturate, and all of a sudden you're going to see that benefit. Maybe in a sprint performance, some of that might be doing a 60 meter, 100 meter sprint, yes. But for someone that's going for a long period of time, 2-3 hours, you're going to exhaust all that anyway. So more than likely, if anything, I would focus more on carbohydrate timing than I would creatine timing with that, because you're going to have to take creatine after. Even a small dose, like 2 or 2.5 grams, if it does, I wouldn't think that's going to show much benefit. I think that's actually been researched in those type of matches, because it's hard to really know. And you're not going to be able to do muscle biopsies during a tennis match.
And then how much of it is mental? There's so many other factors that are going in. It's really hard to tease out how effective is the creatine itself. For the most part, someone can think, if you're thinking timing, you're looking at average 5 grams a day. It could be 3 grams for a smaller person, or like you said, a non-athlete, 5 grams on average. Maybe if someone is like a really large muscular person, extremely athletic, active, maybe 7 grams daily. And so that, when you think about timing, ideally post-workout, but could it also just be any time? Say it's not convenient for someone. Could someone, if it worked for them, to just do it at nighttime before bed? Would that be okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it really doesn't have to be right after the
Okay.
workout. Like you said, it could be anytime throughout the day. That's beneficial. It's like protein.
Mm-hmm.
Protein doesn't, we know the new research on protein. It doesn't actually have to be right
Mm-hmm.
after the workout. As long as you get adequate amounts throughout the day, it's still, you're going to see pretty much the same benefits. So that's definitely an important, great point.
And so if someone does choose to do the loading phase, that 20 grams a day for the first 5 to 7 days, then settle into that, 3 to 5 grams a day, that's okay. Tavis sort of takes it on that more conservative side and just says, you know what, no need to do all that for most people. Let's go that 3 to 5. If someone is doing 20 grams, sometimes taking 5 grams 4 times a day, it's hard for people to remember to do anything 4 times a day. Would it be okay for someone to do 10 grams twice a day?
Yeah, they could. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, they definitely could because it's probably going to have the same effect. And
Yeah.
I can't think of any studies that have looked at all the different ways to dose.
Yeah, right.
It seems like years ago when they came out with that protocol, they've tested that protocol.
Right.
They've
And
looked at
only that one. Yeah.
right. It's not like we see, all right, if you do
Yeah.
2 grams 10 times a day.
Yeah. It's like, well, what are people going to do? So we talked timing of, ideally, if you can do it after post workout, that's fantastic. If not, doing it in the morning, doing it before bed. When I think, like we said earlier in this, it's not you take it a couple of days and you're going to see an effect. You're not going to immediately, it's not like you're taking a caffeine supplement that you're going to feel that rev of energy. You're like, it's going to take time for this to see or feel or notice any benefit. And like Tavis said, 12 weeks, 3 months. And so the idea here is, when can you incorporate it into your day that you can have a level of consistency? So here's the thing with it. When you mix it, you take, creatine, and the type of creatine that has the most science showing the best benefit behind it is specifically creatine monohydrate. And so you may see other types of creatine, but creatine monohydrate is what has the most research behind it. It's the most widely available. So I would say just keep it simple, go straight for that. And a lot of times it may be a teaspoon is going to give you that 5-gram dosage. But Tavis, it does not mix well. Like, it settles out. You've got this grittiness at the bottom. I mean, what have your athletes found that's best in terms of compliance? I know, like a protein smoothie, blending it in something like that, because that's going to help it stay in suspension. But any other like tips or things that you found have helped people be more consistent?
The smoothie is, number one, so as long as you're not like putting it into something and mixing it and then letting it sit for a while, it's going to dissolve and it's going to mix around, like a lot of different things do today, even some of our little tablets and things. But most importantly, what I've seen, at least from an athlete perspective and the clientele I work with, is number one, the sooner you take it, the more likely you're going to remember to take it. That'll make it a lot easier. So mixing it with sort of carbohydrate beverage, whether that's a sports drink or whatever that is, could be a juice. Number one, that sugar is going to help get creatine to the muscle tissue a little faster, but it's also going to help replace glycogen levels faster. We've seen that. What's glycogen is basically your gas tank. So when you eat carbs, it goes to the liver and the muscle. It gets stored there. When you put creatine and carbohydrate together, especially fast-acting sugar carbs, the actual creatine helps restore your gas tank a lot faster. And you put protein in that, like that smoothie, then you really have an ideal window for recovery, because one of the things we haven't discussed yet, why creatine post-workout, is that there's been pretty good bit of studies that show it reduces inflammation, it reduces muscle damage, it helps with slowing the increase in lactate production. So there's a lot of different other reasons to do that. But from a solubility standpoint, the higher the temperature, the less soluble. Also, you got to watch certain environments with pH. You have to be careful there. But at the end of the day, it's consuming it faster. Don't let it sit for a while. If not, you're going to have to shake it up and make sure it mixes.
How much of it is because there is some creatine, it loses its impact or basically effectiveness, because some of the creatine, if it's when it's in that powdered form, it stays pure and it's creatine. But as it's dissolved into a liquid, some of it can convert into creatinine, which is not going to have that same benefit. Do you know about how much is converted? Because like for someone, it might be easy when they're, say, at their house, they take their teaspoon of creatine, they put it into whatever they're going to have it in, they shake it, they go to the gym or they go to that workout, that training, but they might not be consuming it for 90 minutes, 2 hours, 3 hours. How long, is there anything that's showing us like how long something can stay in solution, creatine can stay in solution before it's losing its effectiveness?
Yeah, that I'm not 100% sure of, because I don't know if they've looked at all those different windows of time. They may have had those studies. I have not read those if they have, so I'm not 100% sure what that looks like. Yeah, and I wouldn't advocate doing that. I wouldn't put it in a solution and let it sit for a while. If anything, the best way to prevent that from happening, and I know not everybody's going to do that, is just make sure you wait until after your workout to use it. That'll prevent you from having to worry about that. But a small conversion, there is I think a 1 to 2% conversion to creatinine from what I've seen. I think it's 1% to 2%. It's very, very small.
Okay.
So I wouldn't really be concerned
Okay.
with that, because we've looked at a lot of different dosages for athletes post-workout.
Or if somebody does want to have it right after their workout, just keep that bottle of creatine in your gym bag, and you have that and you just tote it around with you. And it's not giant. They're sort of like a vitamin bottle. You can get them in. So I have this idea, and I'm trying this for someone who wants to try creatine, but the dissolvability and how it's sort of gritty, and there's some barriers there for this person. So I'm like, we have these really delicious peanut butter cups that we have in our Eat Fit cookbook, and they're like no sugar peanut butter cups. And I was looking at, because the idea too is like that if you have a high pH or very low pH, that can be maybe more beneficial for the creatine to stay intact and also refrigerated, so they're not getting heat damaged. So I'm wondering, and you can send me this separately, but Tavis, I know you've done a lot of research on like vitamin development and supplement development. Is there a company that tests creatine like availability? Because I think it'd be really cool. So I made a batch of them. I added in each peanut butter cup what would essentially be like a 5-gram dose of creatine, and it tastes good. But I'm like, well, I wonder how much of it is actually staying intact here. So I know that's a big cliffhanger for our listeners. But
what's the name of this product going to be one day?
I don't know. It's going to have to be refrigerated. I know there's a lot of potential here. But yeah, so I'm curious. I'm like, some of these things, of course, it's thousands of dollars to test for concentration. And so for something that's just my own, geeky curiosity on it, I'm not going to pay thousands of dollars. But I thought, wow, that would be really cool to have it tested to see how much of this is still creatine in that active form in something that's like a vehicle for delivery like this. This is if y'all hear me and Tavis talking right now all of a sudden we're going to start this company that's got your sweet treats that are low sugar that are also going to be high creatine. Tavis, let me ask real quick too, in the recovery on including that carbohydrate source for someone who maybe their primary goal is, fat loss, or they're trying to avoid those sugars. How necessary is it to have that source of carbohydrate or glucose with creatine? Or do we still have a strong level of effectiveness if they're doing creatine post-workout without the sugar or carbohydrate?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, if you don't need an enormous amount of calories, then you don't have to have the sugar. Those athletes or those individuals, kind of categorize everybody together, but individuals, whether you're a weekend warrior, you just go to the gym and work out, it's not really imminent to have sugar or carbohydrate in your beverage right after. For those individuals that are doing 90 minutes, 2 hours, really intense, they're exhausted. They might be burning 12, 14, 1,500 calories in a 2-hour workout. That's a whole different story. If you're going to the gym 45 minutes and you're lifting and your goal is fat loss, you don't have to have a recovery beverage. And I see that, like somebody might go do 30 minutes of cardio and they think the end of it's smoothie. It's like, well, actually, you're actually in a surplus now. Yeah. You don't really need that smoothie from a 30-minute workout. So yeah, that's a great point. You can just take that with water.
Okay.
That would be ideal in that situation.
And I've found some of the recommendations that I'd seen on creatine was even in tea, because a little bit of a flavor helps. And so it could be a slightly warm tea to help with that dissolvability, or herbal tea, flavored tea. You can get like your fruity or minty or anything like that might just also give you a little bit of flavor besides just pure water. Or there's these drinks like Suja. They have they're called like lemon love and things like that. They have a little bit of lemon cayenne, some sweetener and stuff. And so something like that's still a low sugar beverage, but maybe flavored. Go ahead and put it into that. What are some of the brands that you recommend? And what do you recommend? How would you guide someone who's looking to try this to make sure that they have that quality product?
Yeah, well, the most important thing with creatine, obviously you mentioned before, is monohydrate, still by Dr. Kreider, who's gotten textbooks on creatine. He's done more research on creatine than I think anyone that I've known. He's based out of Texas A&M. It's number one, CreaPure. It's a German-based creatine by Alzchem. They provide the purest form of monohydrate. A lot of your top brands use that. But also from a safety perspective, that is really related to third-party testing to prevent adulteration of products. What does that mean? That means that no banned substances like steroids, stimulants, things that can get inside that. So I personally, when I use products, especially products like that, I want to make sure it's either NSF or Informed Sport certified. And that just means it's been third-party tested. That's really critical for athletes. If it has CreaPure on the label, and it'll have a little logo that says CreaPure, that means it's using that German-based creatine. Brands like Thorne, Clean Athlete, Momentous, and those are brands that really focus on collegiate and professional Olympic athletes. A lot of high school athletes use those products as well. I use them just because I trust the brands and I know they do a great job on product formulation as well. So yeah, those are some of the companies that I personally worked with, and just to know from experience of being in collegiate and professional sports.
Mm-hmm. And so CreaPure is the ingredient. So it's the singular, like isolated ingredient of creatine monohydrate, but is specifically in the ingredient produced by the company you mentioned in Germany that I would imagine is patented for that particular type of production of creatine. And so if you see that CreaPure symbol on there, then you know that you've got that quality product. Any other things that you would share with our listeners as far as, either other benefits that we haven't talked about, things to keep in mind, how to make it feasible or realistic to be consistent with it?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because a friend of mine texted me the other day. He's like, "Hey, what would you do?" He's having some GI distress, right? He's like, "I've been taking creatine and my stomach hurts." That could be a side effect for certain people. Not everybody's going to have that, but so he was taking 5 grams at one dose. So maybe let's split it up into 2.5, and let's see if you spread those out throughout the day. I haven't heard back yet, so we don't know, if that's improved. But that's just something to kind of think about. Is if you have any GI distress, maybe you want to stop, especially if you have not had that before.
I'm really glad you mentioned that because I totally forgot to bring that up. We talked about, okay, it's not really related to cramping, not really related to kidney function, but GI distress could be an issue. So doing smaller doses if so.
Yeah, that's just something obviously we got to look at on a case-to-case basis. But I think one of the most important things is the youth athlete market. When we look at the safety and side effects, it's been actually extremely well researched, not on the youth athlete side, but just from kids under 18. We've seen infants, we've seen children, kids with muscular dystrophy and cancer, kids with what's called muscle creatine disease or creatine deficiencies that they've used, kids with traumatic brain injury or concussion, they've used high doses. No side effects. So from the side effect side and from the risk side, I have no concerns. That doesn't mean go run out, buy it, and start giving kids creatine, because we don't have a lot of really studies on the long-term effects, meaning what happens if a 15-year-old kid takes creatine for a year at 5 grams or loads. We don't know that. There's never been any studies to look at that. If anything, if you're going to do stuff like that, get blood work evaluated before, look at a CBC, which looks at obviously iron panels and immune system panels, but also a complete metabolic panel that looks at kidney and liver function. That would be the first thing. And then after 3 to 6 months, look at that again, see if nothing's happened, then we know then there's no side effects happening for that individual person. From a longevity, from a health and wellness, there's a new textbook that looks at so many different things, from improving the quality maybe of heart function, maybe reducing the risk of arrhythmia. I mean, rehabilitation. There's so many benefits from creatine that there's 65,000 plus studies now that have looked at creatine supplementation, and only maybe 5 or maybe 6 or 7,000, I don't know the exact number because it changes weekly, has looked at sports performance. The other 90% are looking at those, muscle wasting conditions, cancer, Lou Gehrig's disease, fibromyalgia. It's just, it goes on and on. It doesn't stop with one type.
It's fascinating. There's just so much. And I think that's not what hits the mainstream media. The sports or the performance, or we read about athletes, taking it and that's what hits it. So knowing that there is just so much benefit far beyond the benefit that we see to athletes. So when we, to kind of sum it up, if we look at creatine, the key is to be consistent. Give yourself several months before you assess if it's helping you or not, if it's helping to support any of the benefits that you may be looking at taking it for. You can choose to start with that loading phase, only 5 to 7 days if so, and that's at 20 grams and divided doses for 5 to 7 days. Or you can go just straight into that 3 to 5 grams a day as maintenance. And so if you did do the loading, you'll still settle into that 3 to 5 grams a day after that. When we talk about timing, ideally best timing would be post-workout, if you can add it in then. But more importantly than that is finding that convenient time that you're going to be consistent with this. Knowing that it does settle out, it doesn't stay in suspension very well when you mix it. So putting it into a smoothie can really help with that issue. Or if you're putting it into something like that herbal tea or that other kind of flavored drink that you have and you're shaking it up a bit, know that you're going to have to maybe add a little bit more, do the whole swirl and kind of pound it back to get the stuff that's kind of the granular and the bottom of it. So, kind of getting used to what this is going to look like or how you can be consistent with adding this in. As Tavis was saying, also, looking for that product that's going to be a quality product. If you see that CreaPure label, that logo on the label, that's going to be that immediate indicator that that's going to be made with that quality brand of creatine produced. And Tavis, I really appreciate it. We'll include the links to the papers that we talked about in the show notes of this. And I'll include information of how someone can reach out to you also if they've got questions.
Awesome. No, I really appreciate it. Thanks. That was so much fun, and always good to catch up, chat, and talk shop about things that we enjoy talking about.
For sure. And then we'll have to brainstorm on the other ones because there's going to be so much that we could do more on. I can't believe this is our first. All right. Thanks, Tavis. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Molly.
Always grateful to Tavis for his insight, for his enthusiasm for our profession. I can always count on him also to be versed in the latest research. As you heard, he's just so passionate, so knowledgeable, and so easy to talk with and just learn from in so many spaces. I'm also excited to have him join us for another podcast soon. There's so much that we can talk about, and I can't believe I haven't had him join me yet. So I'll include the links that Tavis and I talked about in the show notes of this episode. I'll also include information about how to connect with Tavis for any other questions as well. And let me know what you think. If you've tried creatine, you have an opinion on it. If you're like, man, I would have never even thought of that, but now I'm intrigued, or you do add it in, I would love to hear your experience with it. I am registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. If you like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. If you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join us next week for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.